quality of life that Paige Figge desperately wanted for her daughter Charlotte. But she still had one hurdle to cross: convincing dispensary owners like the Stanleys to sell marijuana to a 5-year-old little girl.
When Charlotte's mother called my brother Joel, the brothers had a meeting. He said, "Tell us about this patient. She's 5 years old," he said. And we said, "Oh, no, we can't do that."
Why? It was the fear of the unknown. Charlotte was the youngest patient at the time wanting marijuana. Would it be too much for her? Or would it change her life forever? We'll find that out later. But first, learn more about what marijuana does to your kid's brain, and yours as well.
That's what I'm talking about. Y'all smoking or what? If you smoking weed, make some noise. Yeah.
April 20th, Denver, Colorado.
We like we smoke, we sing.
Tens of thousands from around the country and the world lighting up legally.
Happy Cannabis Cup, y'all.
For some, it's a lifestyle. For others, it's a lifeline.
We're working with the Lupus Foundation and rheumatoid arthritis.
But for all of them, I wondered, what was it doing to their brains?
Some of my patients call me pot doc.
Your patients call you pot doc?
Well, they never meet anybody who's as interested in hearing about their marijuana use as I am.
Dr. Stacy Gruber is serious about pot.
I want you to name the color and not to read it.
Okay.
I met her in her labs at McLean Hospital near Boston. She's using high-tech imaging to see what happens in the brain when you smoke.
When you first smoke, that is, you light up a joint, a spliff, a blunt, receptors, which are throughout the brain, respond. And these areas of the brain are responsible for things like pleasure, memory, learning, sensation, sense of time and space, coordination, movement, appetite, and other drives, shall we say. So it's sort of an all-over impact, right?
So reward, pleasure, hunger. You have this overall feeling of well-being, they say. That all sounds pretty good.
It does sound pretty good.
And it's not just feeling good, but there's this phenomenon reported by many smokers over the years, especially famous artists, the ability to be more creative.
When you feel that high, there's sort of a release of dopamine, and your brain sort of has the ability now to perceive things slightly differently from the way you might have if you hadn't been smoking pot. What you really see is this reduction in inhibitory function.
Welcome, Dr. Gupta.
Pretty spectacular. Less inhibition. That's something that painter Amir says helps him be more creative. A successful artist, his canvases sell for up to $25,000.
It's my favorite way to work.
Using marijuana.
Yeah.
He's been painting for 14 years, smoking for even longer. He says it makes him feel more relaxed, but most importantly for him, he says it makes him less critical of his own work.
Stop worrying so much about this and that, and just sort of looking and being as present as possible.
Amir does caution that it's a delicate balance for him.
It would make me very apprehensive, as maybe a little paranoid, just too analytical.
You can get paranoid, you can have disorganized thinking, you get disoriented. It can be uncomfortable, it can lead to panic attacks or anxiety attacks in people.
How do you know when you've done too much?
Simple tasks become very frustrating, like mixing paint, and then just sort of get into this state of duh, you know?
Inhale.
And why that happens is exactly what Columbia University neuroscientist Carl Hart is investigating.
Exhale.
Research subjects in his lab smoke marijuana and then take a variety of cognitive tests.
The effects will be disruption in memory, disruptions in inhibitory control. They will become slower at cognitive functioning, a wide range of things. These effects are temporary, but they're pretty pronounced and they are clear.
And it's slowly becoming clear to scientists what part of the brain is most affected. It's the prefrontal cortex.
It's very important for planning, thinking, coordinating your behaviors. There are tons of marijuana receptors in this region. And we think that marijuana, particularly in the novice, can disrupt all of those behaviors.
An impairment that Hart cautions could be dangerous, especially when driving.
You may prematurely hit your brakes. You may prematurely hit the gas pedal, a wide range of things. You may make a turn without looking more carefully.
Look at this experiment done by CNN affiliate KIRO in Washington State. Subjects smoked marijuana and then drove. One was a daily medical marijuana smoker, and another, an infrequent weekend smoker.
Relaxed and buzzed.
The more the novice user smoked, the more trouble behind the wheel.
Watch yourself, watch yourself.
But interestingly, the habitual smoker didn't have as much trouble.
I wouldn't pull her off the road, no. No, not yet.
And that's something I witnessed firsthand driving around with 19-year-old Chaz Moore. The day that I spent with him, he had been smoking all day long.
Do you feel impaired at all?
No, I don't. I feel normal.
Turns out when you test people who have a lot of experience with cannabis, you don't see many disruptions. But if you test people who have sort of a limited history with cannabis, you can see some clear, pronounced disruptions.
Of course, no one thinks that driving when using marijuana is a good idea. But what scientists can't answer is if there is a safe legal limit, and if people who use marijuana daily as a medicine should be able to drive. How impaired are they? What is more clear, though, is the effect of marijuana on the young brain.
What we see is a very big difference in people who begin to smoke prior to the age of 16 and those who smoke after age 16, what we call early versus later onset.
Gruber's brain scans show that the white matter, those are the highways that help the brain communicate from one point to another, are impaired in those who start smoking early.
Maybe there's underlying white matter connectivity differences.
That's your concern, it sounds like, that those highways, those white matter highways, are just more disrupted in people who start smoking early.
That's what we see.
Perhaps not surprising, given what we know about the young developing brain.
That's a very delicate time in brain development, and that's not a good time to be taking any drugs.
Preliminary research shows that early onset smokers are slower at tasks, have lower IQs later in life, higher risk of strokes, and increased incidence of psychotic disorders. And while these studies are not conclusive, some scientists are still concerned because in 2012, 35% of high school seniors lit up. And that could mean a generation of kids with damaged brains. And many fear something else.
I never really told myself I needed help.
A generation of marijuana addicts. When we come back, the truth and the science behind what's being called a growing epidemic. And later, Charlotte's story, the first and youngest child to try marijuana in Colorado. This was the day Chaz Moore almost died. Pumped full of drugs like morphine, Dilaudid, Valium, to quiet a non-stop 48-hour attack.
I thought I was going to overdose, and yeah, it was pretty bad.
At his bedside, his father Sean watched his son go from being catatonic to what he calls high as a kite.
How high are you on the morphine?
I'm not high on.
I've watched friends of mine die from taking the same drugs that he took.
You see, Sean was a drug addict, and he had struggled for decades to get clean.
It was scary.
It was really important for him not to take these drugs if he could avoid them.
If he could avoid them. I know how addictive they are. I've seen it. It scared the hell out of me.
But Sean is not scared of marijuana, and neither is Chaz.
This right here, I don't get sick off of it. I can't overdose.
And Chaz is right about that. While there are fatal, accidental prescription medicine overdoses every 19 minutes in this country, there are virtually no reports of fatal marijuana overdoses. And it's perhaps one of the biggest reasons most people think pot is safe. In fact, a new study of children showed that by high school, only 1 in 5 think marijuana is harmful. That's the lowest number in more than 2 decades. And it's something we heard over and over as we traveled around the country.
Not really that harmful.
It has a lot of benefits. Not really too concerned about it.
I think it's safe if you're a safe person.
Probiotics are not.
But the experts we spoke to said there is more to the story.
There are people who compulsively smoke, who want to stop smoking, but they can't stop smoking.
In fact, 9% of marijuana users will become dependent. Now, that's not as high as other drugs, like heroin. 23% of users become addicted, or 17% with cocaine, or 15% with alcohol. But it's still approximately 1 out of every 11 marijuana smokers.
There's no longer any scientific debate that marijuana is not just psychologically addictive, but also physically addictive. So give me an update. How you doing?
Dr. Christian Thurstone runs one of Colorado's largest youth substance abuse treatment clinics. The number of marijuana addicts he treats has tripled in the last 3 years alone.
Literally, I cried about it. Marijuana is #1 on their list of priorities. They have dropped out of life.
Back in the day, I wouldn't feel like my day has really started if I didn't get high.
Joel Vargas started smoking when he was just 13. By 15, he was smoking more than a dozen times a day. He stopped skateboarding. He even dropped out of school.
I like getting high. I need to get high because my brain is telling me.
Adolescents, starting at about age 13, have a pretty mature brain reward center, so they can experience rewards and pleasures the same way adults can. But the problem with that is that their prefrontal cortex, which helps people think ahead, control their impulses, that's not fully developed until age 24. That explains why adolescents are much more vulnerable.
There's something else that addiction experts believe is likely happening in the brain. When you smoke pot, the feel-good chemicals that make up marijuana, called cannabinoids, remember them? They cause your brain to stop producing its own natural cannabinoids. When you stop smoking, you have no feel-good cannabinoids of your own. Until your body kickstarts production, you feel lousy. So many people smoke again to feel better. And today's marijuana could be more addictive. It has more of the psychoactive ingredient THC than ever before. Brain researcher Dr. Nora Volkov.
If you smoke a very potent marijuana, the 9-THC content is going to go very fast into your brain at relatively high concentrations, and then that increases its rewarding effects and its likelihood of transition into addiction.
So how much stronger is it?
You see the barbed wire, obviously, on the fences.
Well, I traveled to Mississippi, where marijuana is illegal. But here, on the campus of one of the country's oldest universities, Ole Miss, a huge stash of marijuana is under lock and key.
This is our vault.
This is some pretty tight security. I mean, look at this door.
Mahmoud El Soli runs what's called the Marijuana Potency Project.
What's the potency of this?
This is about 8%.
For 3 decades now, his team has analyzed weed confiscated from drug busts.
This is 36% THC. You can smell it. It has a good aromatic, smell.
How much does this worry you? 36% THC, confiscated.
Very, very dangerous material. For someone that is not experienced in marijuana smoking, take some of this and they're going to go into the negative effects of the high amounts of THC, the psychosis, the irritation, the irritability, the paranoia, and all of this.
And while not all the plants are this high, there's no question he's seen a trend. In 1972, the average potency was less than 1% THC. Now, it's nearly 13%.
Are people becoming more obsessed with high THC marijuana?
I think so. They start out with a 0.5% or 1%, and they get a good high. And then as they continue to use that, it doesn't give them the same high anymore, so they seek either smoking more or higher potency material.
It happened to Joel Vargas. After a couple of years of smoking daily, Joel eventually ended up in rehab, where he faced mild withdrawal symptoms like irritability, insomnia, nausea,
It certainly isn't anything nearly as dangerous as abrupt discontinuation of alcohol. You know, for somebody like Joel, going into rehab is really about learning new behaviors, more than it is about sort of treating the physiological dependence or tolerance or withdrawal issues.